The widowed stableman awoke to find the Duchess wearing his shirt. What she said left him frozen. He woke to the scent of lavender and rain, and the sight of a woman he had no right to see. Her Grace, the Duchess of Ashford, standing barefoot in his stable quarters, wearing nothing but his linen work shirt. The fabric fell to her knees, and her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders like a widow's veil. She turned when she heard him stir, and her eyes, those infamous violet eyes that had frozen 100 suitors in ballrooms, held not shame, but something far more dangerous. "I need you to ruin me," she whispered, her voice breaking on the last word. "Publicly, thoroughly, before the week is out." Thomas Carver's heart, that traitorous organ that had buried itself with his wife 3 years prior, began to beat again. Wait, before the next confession unfolds, if this story has already stirred your heart, tell us where you're watching from. To make sure you don't miss the next betrayal, kiss, or redemption, subscribe and join our circle. The next heartbeat might change everything. Now, back to the scene. The morning light had barely broken through the stable's high windows, casting long shadows across the hay-strewn floor. Thomas sat up slowly, his calloused hands gripping the edge of his rough wooden cot. He was a man built for labor, broad shoulders, scarred hands, a face weathered by wind and grief. At 32, he looked older. Widowhood had carved lines around his eyes that no amount of sleep could erase. "Your Grace," he managed, his voice hoarse with sleep and shock. He reached for his coat, desperate to cover himself, though he wore his nightshirt. "What? How?" "I walked," she said, simply, 2 miles through the woods, in the dark. I have perhaps an hour before my absence is noticed." She moved closer, and he could see she had been crying. Her face, famous throughout England for its cold perfection, was blotched with red. "They're trying to marry me off again, Lord Pemberton. He's 57, cruel, and my late husband's closest friend. The betrothal papers are being drawn as we speak." Thomas stood, keeping his distance, his mind racing. Everyone in 3 counties knew of the Duchess of Ashford, how she'd been married at 19 to a duke 3 times her age, how he died last year under mysterious circumstances, leaving her wealthy but trapped by scandal. Whispers followed her like shadows, that she'd poisoned him, that she'd taken lovers, that she was mad with grief, or perhaps just mad. None of it explained why she stood in his stable wearing his shirt. "I don't understand," he said carefully. "Why me? Why this?" She laughed, a brittle sound that made his chest ache. "Because you're the one man in this God-forsaken county who looks at me like I'm human. Do you know what that's worth?" She pressed her hands to her face. "Because you're scandalous enough to destroy me properly. A widowed stableman, common-born, with nothing to gain from my ruin. Because when I saw you at the churchyard last month, placing flowers on your wife's grave, I knew you understood what it meant to be trapped by the dead. The mention of Sarah, his Sarah, dead of childbed fever 3 winters ago, made Thomas's hands shake. He had loved his wife with the kind of quiet devotion that needs no poetry. Her death had hollowed him out, left him a ghost among horses and hay. You followed me to the churchyard?" His voice was soft, not accusing. "I've been following you for weeks. The Duchess—" No, he realized, not the Duchess in this moment, but Catherine, just Catherine, sank onto his cot, her borrowed shirt pooling around her, watching you gentle the horses, listening to you sing to them when you think no one can hear. You have a beautiful voice, Mr. Carver. It sounds like kindness." Thomas felt his carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. 3 years of careful solitude, of speaking only to animals and avoiding the pitying looks of villagers, threatened to crumble under the weight of her desperate honesty. "What you're asking," he said slowly, "would destroy us both." "Yes," she agreed, "but I would be destroyed by my own choice, not theirs. Don't you see? If I'm ruined by scandal, Lord Pemberton cannot have me. The marriage contracts would be void. I could retire to my dower house, live quietly, be free." Her hands twisted in the fabric of his shirt. "I have money enough to leave England if necessary, but you," her voice caught, "I would compensate you. Enough to buy your own stables, anywhere you wished. Enough to disappear if that's what you wanted. I don't want your money." The words came out harder than he intended. "Then what do you want?" She stood, crossed the small space between them. This close, he could see the fine trembling in her hands, smell the expensive soap that clung to her skin beneath his plain shirt. Name it, anything. What did he want? To wake up and find his wife beside him, their child alive and perfect. To unknow the taste of grief. To feel something other than the dull ache that had become his existence. "I want you to tell me the truth," he said quietly. "Did you love him? Your husband?" Catherine's expression shifted, something raw and painful crossing her face. "No," she whispered. "I was sold to him by my father to cover gambling debts. The Duke was not kind, not cruel in the way people imagine. He never struck me. But he collected me like he collected his horses and his art, something beautiful to display and ignore." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I prayed for him to die, Mr. Carver. Every night for 7 years I prayed. And when he finally did, they said I'd killed him. Did you?" "No." Her eyes met his, unflinching. "But I won't pretend I mourned him." The honesty of it struck Thomas like a blow. Here was a woman stripped of all pretense, standing in his stable in borrowed clothes, asking him to damn them both for the sake of her freedom. It was madness. It was impossible. It was the first real thing had felt since Sarah died. "I can't give you what you're asking," he said, and watched her face fall. "But I won't send you back to them either." Hope flickered in her violet eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying—" Thomas ran his hand through his hair, a gesture of pure frustration. "I don't know what I'm saying. I need to think. But you can't stay here. They'll have search parties out by now. Where are your clothes?" "Hidden behind the old oak, where the property border meets the woods." She moved toward the door, then stopped. "Mr. Carver, Thomas, if I may call you that?" He nodded, unable to speak. "Thank you," she said simply, "for not treating me like I'm made of glass or poison." After she slipped away into the breaking dawn, Thomas sat on his cot for a long time, holding the shirt she'd worn. It still carried her warmth, her scent. He thought of Sarah, of the promises had made at her graveside to never love again, to keep his heart locked away where grief couldn't touch it. But Catherine hadn't asked for love. She'd asked for ruin. And somehow, impossibly, that felt like the beginning of something rather than an end. 3 days passed before Thomas saw her again. 3 days during which he learned that the countryside was indeed ablaze with talk of the Duchess's strange behavior. She'd been found wandering the woods at dawn, her dress torn and muddy, claiming she'd lost her way during an early morning walk. The scandal was enough to delay the betrothal to Lord Pemberton, but not enough to break it. Thomas kept to his work, caring for the Earl of Blackwood's horses with the same quiet dedication he always had. His employer was an absent landlord, visiting only twice a year, which suited Thomas perfectly. It meant he could lose himself in the rhythmic work of feeding, grooming, and training without the burden of excessive conversation. But his mind wouldn't rest. Catherine's words haunted him during the day, and at night he dreamed of violet eyes and desperate confessions. On the fourth day, a messenger arrived at the stables, a young maid, nervous and flushed. "Mr. Carver, I have a letter for you, from a concerned party." She pressed the sealed envelope into his hands and fled before he could question her. The paper was expensive, the seal unmarked. Inside, in elegant script, "Tomorrow evening, the old chapel ruins on the North Hill. After sunset. Come alone or don't come at all. We must speak of impossible things. See." Thomas held the letter over the lamp flame until it caught fire, watching it curl and blacken. Then he saddled his own horse, a gentle mare named Mercy that he'd saved from the knacker's yard, and rode to the North Hill to examine the meeting place in daylight. The chapel ruins dated back centuries, abandoned after the Reformation and left to crumble into picturesque decay. Lovers used it sometimes when they thought no one knew. Thomas remembered bringing Sarah here once in the early days of their courtship when everything still felt possible. The memory should have brought pain, but instead he felt Sarah's presence like a benediction. His wife had been a practical woman, kind and sensible. She wouldn't have wanted him to live like a ghost forever. "Live," he imagined her saying in that gentle, firm way she had. "For God's sake, Thomas, live." As the sun set the following evening, Thomas rode Mercy up the hill path, his heart beating an unfamiliar rhythm against his ribs. He found Catherine already there, seated on a fallen stone, wrapped in a dark cloak that made her nearly invisible in the twilight. This time her hair was properly pinned, her dress respectable, but her face held the same desperate honesty he remembered. "You came," she said, relief evident in her voice. "You asked." Thomas dismounted, approached slowly. "Though I'm still not certain why." "Because I've been thinking," Catherine said, standing, "about what you said, that you couldn't give me what I asked for." She moved closer, and in the dying light, her eyes were luminous. "I've been asking the wrong question." "What do you mean?" "I asked you to ruin me. But what I should have asked is this: will you help me disappear?" Thomas felt his breath catch. "Explain." "I have money hidden away. Money my husband never knew about, that I've been saving for years. Enough for two people to vanish, to start over somewhere no one knows the name Ashford or Carver. America, perhaps, or Scotland, somewhere far from Lord Pemberton and his contracts." She twisted her hands together. "I'm not asking you to love me, Thomas. I'm not even asking you to want me. I'm asking you to be my partner in freedom." "That's still madness," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Catherine challenged. "You've been dead for 3 years, Thomas Carver. I've been dead for 7. What if we could be alive again? Not together in the way the world demands. I know you loved your wife, but as companions, as friends, as two people who refuse to let the world bury them before their time." She pulled a small leather purse from her cloak, opened it to reveal gold coins that gleamed even in the darkness. "This is real. I have more hidden. Enough to buy a small farm, or a stable, or whatever life you can imagine beyond this one. All I ask is that you take me with you." Thomas stared at the gold, then at her face. "Why me?" he asked again, the question that had haunted him since she'd first appeared in his quarters. "You could hire a dozen men to escort you anywhere you wished. Why risk everything on a widowed stableman who can barely string 2 words together in polite company?" Catherine's laugh was soft, sad. "Because when I watched you at that graveside, I saw someone who knew how to love purely, without possession or cruelty, and I thought, if I could have even a fraction of that kindness directed at me, as a friend, as a companion, it would be worth any risk." She closed the purse, held it out to him. "I'm not asking you to replace what you lost, Thomas. I'm asking you to help me escape what I never chose." The weight of the purse in his hands felt like possibility, like choice, like a door opening after years in darkness. "If we did this," he said slowly, "we could never come back. You'd lose your title, your position. Well, I have little to lose, but you'd be cut off from everything you know." "Everything I know is a cage," Catherine said simply. "A golden one, perhaps, but still a cage. And I would rather be free in rags than imprisoned in silk for one more day." Thomas thought of his small, quiet life, the routine that had saved him from drowning in grief, the safety of solitude. Then he thought of Catherine's words, "You've been dead for 3 years." She was right. He had been. Going through motions, existing but not living, speaking to horses because they didn't expect pieces of his heart he no longer possessed. But standing here in the ruins with this strange Duchess, Thomas felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Not love, he knew love, and this wasn't it, but perhaps kinship, perhaps recognition. 2 souls who had survived what should have killed them, now being offered a chance to do more than merely survive. "I need conditions," he said finally, and watched hope bloom in her face. "We travel as siblings, not lovers. Brother and sister, for propriety's sake. I won't touch you, won't claim you, won't pretend at something I can't give. But I'll protect you, help you build whatever life you're seeking, as a friend, only as a friend." "Yes," Catherine breathed. "Yes, anything. Those terms are more than fair."
"And I choose where we go first," Thomas continued. "Give me that much control. I know people in Scotland, my mother's family. They'd help us disappear properly, ask no questions. But we go to them on my terms, tell them the story I create. Agreed?" "Agreed." She held out her hand, formal as a business contract. Thomas took it, her fingers small and cold in his calloused palm. "Then we have a bargain, Your Grace." "Catherine," she corrected. "If we're to be siblings, you should call me Catherine, or Kate, if you prefer. I've always rather wanted a nickname." Despite everything, the madness of the plan, the impossibility of the situation, Thomas felt a smile tug at his lips. "Kate, then, though it'll take practice." "We have time to practice," Kate said. "The journey to Scotland is long." They spent the next hour planning in whispers, working out details with the careful precision of soldiers preparing for battle. Kate would continue her normal routine for a week, letting the scandal of her morning walk die down. Thomas would quietly sell what little he owned, arrange travel papers, and prepare Mercy for a long journey. On the agreed night, Kate would slip away after the household slept, meeting Thomas at a crossroads 5 miles north of the estate. From there, they would ride through the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and anyone who might follow. It was risky, it was desperate, but as Thomas rode home that night, the purse of gold hidden in his coat and a plan unfolding in his mind, he realized something profound. He wanted to live again. Not in the way he had with Sarah. That love was sacred, finished, perfect in its completion. But in a new way, a way that honored her memory by refusing to be buried alongside her. The night before their planned departure, Thomas visited Sarah's grave one final time. He brought wild roses, her favorite, and knelt in the damp grass, speaking aloud as he had so many times before. "I'm leaving, love," he said softly. "Going north, maybe beyond. There's a woman, it's not like that, so don't haunt me, but she needs help, and I find I need to help her. Need to do something other than tend horses and count the days until I'm dust beside you."
The wind moved through the churchyard trees, and Thomas chose to hear permission in it. Sarah had never been cruel, never possessive. She would want him to choose life. "I loved you," he continued, his voice breaking. "I love you still. But I'm tired of dying slowly, tired of being half a man. So I'm going to try something mad and possibly stupid. And I hope, wherever you are, you're not too disappointed in me." He placed the roses on her headstone, traced her name with his fingers one last time, and walked away without looking back. Some goodbyes were too hard to see. The night of their escape arrived with a storm. Rain lashed the countryside, turning roads to mud and making the darkness absolute. Thomas waited at the crossroads with Mercy and a second horse he'd purchased with Kate's gold, a sturdy gelding built for distance. He was soaked to the skin despite his oilcloth coat, beginning to wonder if Kate had changed her mind, when he heard the sound of running feet. She appeared like a ghost from the darkness, wearing men's clothing that hung loose on her frame, her hair hidden beneath a cap, a small pack strapped to her back. She was breathless, muddy, and grinning with wild abandon. "They'll think I drowned," she gasped, as Thomas helped her onto the gelding. "I left my nightgown on the riverbank, my slippers at the water's edge. By morning, they'll be dragging the water from my body." "That's dark," Thomas said. "That's freedom," Kate corrected, and kicked her horse into motion. They rode through the night and into the next day, stopping only to rest the horses and catch brief moments of sleep in sheltered copses. Thomas had mapped their route carefully, avoiding main roads and towns where a noblewoman's face might be recognized. They ate cold food from Thomas's pack, drank from streams, and spoke little, saving their breath for the journey. On the third day, Kate's gelding pulled up lame. They were miles from anywhere, the horse favoring its front left leg in a way that made Thomas's heart sink. He examined the hoof carefully, finding a stone bruise that wouldn't heal quickly. "Can he continue?" Kate asked, her face tense. "Not carrying weight. We'll have to double up on Mercy, lead him behind." Thomas looked at the sky, calculating distance and time. "It'll slow us down considerably." "How much?" "Could add 2 days to our journey, maybe more." Kate was silent for a moment, then nodded. "Then we'll take 2 days more. I won't leave him behind." Something in Thomas's chest tightened at her words. She could have suggested they abandon the lame horse, push forward on Mercy alone. Many people would have. Instead, she chose kindness, even when it cost her safety. "You're softer than you pretend," he said quietly, helping her dismount. "Perhaps," Kate allowed. "Or perhaps I simply know what it's like to be valued only while you're useful." They rode double after that, Kate seated behind Thomas, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. It was the closest they'd been, and Thomas was acutely aware of her presence, the warmth of her against his back, the way she tensed when Mercy stumbled on the rough terrain, the soft sound of her breathing. This was dangerous in a different way than the scandal they'd fled. This was intimacy born of necessity, the kind that could blur the careful lines he'd drawn. Thomas had made promises about the nature of their relationship, and he intended to keep them, for both their sakes. On the 5th night, they took shelter in an abandoned shepherd's hut, too exhausted to continue. The rain had finally stopped, but they were both soaked and shivering. Thomas built a small fire, risk be damned, and they stripped off their wet outer clothes, hanging them to dry on rough wooden pegs. Kate sat wrapped in a blanket, her short hair drying in wild curls, looking younger than her 26 years. "Tell me about her," she said suddenly. "You're Sarah. What was she like?" Thomas poked at the fire, considering. "Kind," he said finally. "Practical. She could birth a foal, bake bread, and balance household accounts all in the same day. She laughed at my terrible jokes. She wanted children desperately." His voice caught. "The pregnancy, it was difficult from the start. The midwife warned us. But Sarah was determined. She said a child was worth any risk. She sounds brave. She was. Thomas stared into the flames. She was also wrong. No child is worth losing her. I would have given up a dozen children to keep her alive one more day. Kate was quiet for a long moment. My husband took lovers, she said finally, openly. It was understood that I would produce an heir and otherwise be decorative. But I never could. Produce an heir, I mean. Month after month, year after year, nothing. He eventually stopped trying, stopped visiting my chambers at all. I was both relief and failure. She pulled the blanket tighter. When he died, some said it was God's punishment for his sins. Others said it was mine, for being barren, as if my worth was only ever in my ability to breed. "That's not your worth," Thomas said fiercely, surprising himself with his vehemence. Kate smiled, sad and genuine. "Perhaps, but it's what the world believes. Why do you think Lord Pemberton wanted me? Not for children. He has heirs aplenty from his first 2 wives. He wanted a beautiful ornament who came with property and couldn't embarrass him with inconvenient pregnancies." She met Thomas' eyes across the fire. "You know what's strange? This week, running through the rain, sleeping rough, being cold and hungry and frightened, it's the freest I've ever felt." Thomas understood exactly what she meant. Despite the hardship, despite the danger, he felt more alive than he had in 3 years. It was as if grief had been a weight compressing him, and Kate's desperate proposal had somehow lifted it enough for him to breathe again. "We're a pair of fools," he said, offering her the last of their bread. "The very best kind," Kate agreed, accepting it with a smile that transformed her face from merely beautiful to radiant. They reached the Scottish border on the 8th day, both of them exhausted, filthy, and triumphant. Thomas led them to a small crofter's cottage where his cousin Maggie lived, a widow like himself, but one who had rebuilt her life with fierce determination. Maggie took one look at them, listened to Thomas's careful explanation about his sister Kate, who needed sanctuary from a difficult situation, and asked no questions beyond, "How long will you stay?" "Just long enough to rest and plan our next steps," Thomas said. "If you'll have us." "Family's family," Maggie said simply. "Even the complicated kind. Come in, both of you. You look like drowned cats." They stayed with Maggie for 3 weeks, recovering their strength and making plans. Kate helped with household tasks, learning to cook and clean in ways her privileged upbringing had never required. Thomas assisted with the heavier farm work, mending fences and tending Maggie's small flock of sheep. In the evenings, they would sit by Maggie's fire and talk about the future, about dreams, about the lives they might build. Kate wanted to learn a trade, something useful, perhaps teaching, or work with horses like Thomas. Thomas found himself describing a small stable of his own, nothing grand, but enough to make an honest living. "You two are good for each other," Maggie observed one night, after Kate had gone to bed in the small loft room. "Not romantic, mind, I can see that clear enough, but good, like you balance each other out." "She's been through hell," Thomas said quietly. "She deserves a chance at something better." "So do you, cousin," Maggie patted his hand. "Grief isn't meant to be a life sentence. Sarah wouldn't have wanted that for you." "Everyone keeps telling me what Sarah would have wanted," Thomas said, "but there was no heat in it. That's because we all knew her, and we all know she loved you enough to want you happy, even if that happiness looks different than what you had together." Maggie stood, creaky and tired. "Think on it, and think on what you want from this life you're building with your sister. Because pretending is exhausting, and lies, even kind ones, have a way of rotting from within." After she went to bed, Thomas sat alone by the dying fire, thinking about Maggie's words. What did he want?
The question felt almost foreign. For so long, he'd wanted only to survive each day, to make it through to evening without breaking down. His wants had narrowed to the simplest things: food, shelter, the quiet comfort of horses who demanded nothing of his heart. But now, with Kate sleeping in the loft above, and a future suddenly full of possibility, Thomas found himself wanting more. Not love, he still couldn't imagine that, but perhaps purpose, perhaps the satisfaction of building something worthwhile, perhaps the strange, unexpected gift of genuine friendship with someone who understood what it meant to survive the unsurvivable. The next morning, Kate came down from the loft to find Thomas already awake, maps spread across the table. "I've been thinking," he said without preamble. "There's a town about 50 miles north of here, Glenmara. It's small, quiet, on the coast. A friend of my father's runs an inn there. He's getting old, might be willing to sell. What if we bought it, ran it together? It's respectable work, steady income, and anonymous. No one looks twice at innkeepers." Kate studied the map, traced the route with her finger. "An inn," she said slowly. "I'd need to learn everything, really. I can barely cook an egg properly." "It'd teach you," Thomas said, "and Maggie could help before we go. The basics, at least. The rest, we'd figure out together." "Together," Kate repeated and smiled. "I like that word. It's been a long time since I had a together that wasn't a cage." She looked up at him, and in the morning light, her violet eyes were clear and hopeful. "Yes, let's buy an inn in Glenmara. Let's become innkeepers. Let's be boring and respectable and gloriously free." They spent another week with Maggie, learning everything she could teach them about practical housekeeping. Kate proved surprisingly adept once she got past her initial helplessness. She had a head for numbers that served well for accounting, and a natural warmth with people that Thomas suspected had been suppressed under years of cold aristocratic training. When they finally left for Glenmara, Maggie hugged them both tightly. "You're good eggs, the pair of you," she said. "Write to me when you're settled. And Thomas," she pulled him aside, "whatever you two are to each other, make sure you're honest about it, at least with yourselves." The journey to Glenmara took 3 days, but this time the travel felt different, less like fleeing and more like journeying towards something. They talked more freely now, sharing stories from their pasts, laughing over silly things, comfortable in silences when conversation lagged. The inn in Glenmara was called the Sailor's Rest, a sturdy stone building that had weathered countless storms. The owner, Duncan MacLeod, was indeed eager to sell. He was 73 and tired of the work. When Thomas explained that he and his sister wanted to buy it, Duncan quoted a price that was fair. Kate produced the gold without hesitation, and by sunset they were the owners of an inn by the sea. The first weeks were chaos. They learned by doing, making countless mistakes and laughing over most of them. Kate burned soup. Thomas mixed up orders, and their first guests were remarkably patient with their obvious inexperience. But slowly, they found their rhythm. Thomas handled the physical labor and dealt with the horses in the small stable attached to the inn. Kate managed the accounts and learned to cook, surprisingly excellent at both. They worked side by side during the days, fell into exhausted sleep in their separate rooms at night, and gradually built something neither had expected, a life that felt real. 3 months after opening, Kate found Thomas in the stable grooming a patron's horse. She stood in the doorway, backlit by late afternoon sun, holding a letter. "This came," she said quietly, "from England, addressed to Catherine Ashford, in care of the Sailor's Rest." Thomas straightened, his heart suddenly pounding. How did anyone— "I don't know." Kate's hands trembled as she turned the envelope over. "But the handwriting is Lord Pemberton's. I'd know it anywhere." They went to Kate's room, the larger of their 2 private chambers, and sat together on the edge of the bed. Kate broke the seal with shaking fingers and read aloud. "Catherine,
I trust this letter finds you well, or as well as one can be after such an elaborate death and resurrection. Yes, I know you live. The body they pulled from the river was not yours. Wrong height, wrong coloring, though conveniently damaged enough to fool cursory examination. I have known from the beginning. You are wondering, I imagine, why I have not exposed you. The answer is simple. I no longer wish to marry you. Your little scheme, inadvertently, freed us both. The scandal of your supposed death allowed me to break the betrothal contracts without dishonor. I have since married another, someone I actually esteem, if you can believe such a thing. I write not to threaten, but to inform you that your secret is safe with me. I have no desire to drag you back to England, no wish to resurrect you for the sake of propriety. In fact, I have taken steps to ensure the law considers Catherine Ashford officially dead. Your estates, as you may wish to know, have gone to a distant cousin who had no connection to either your husband or his cronies. The title is dissolved. You are free, Catherine, truly free. I hope you have found happiness in whatever life you have built. I will not write again. Pemberton. Silence filled the room after Kate finished reading. She set the letter down carefully, as if it might explode, and pressed her hands to her face. I don't understand, she whispered. Why would he? Maybe he's not the villain you thought, Thomas suggested gently. Or maybe he's just pragmatic. Either way, it sounds like you're safe. We're safe. Kate lowered her hands, and Thomas was startled to see she was laughing through tears. I'm dead, she said. Legally, officially dead. Do you realize what that means? I'm not just free, I'm invisible. No one will ever look for me again. Thomas felt a smile tugging at his own lips. So you're saying your elaborate plan actually worked? Just not in the way you intended? Apparently, I'm an accidental genius. Kate wiped her eyes, still laughing. Oh God, Thomas, we did it. We actually did it. On impulse, Thomas pulled her into a hug, the first time he'd initiated physical contact beyond helping her mount horses or navigate rough terrain. Kate stiffened for a moment, then melted into it, her arms wrapping around his waist, her face pressed against his shoulder. They stayed like that for a long moment, two survivors holding each other up, and Thomas felt something settle in his chest. Not romantic love, that still belonged to Sarah, might always belong to Sarah, but something equally valuable. Profound friendship, trust, the knowledge that he was no longer alone in the world, and neither was she. When they finally pulled apart, both a bit embarrassed, Kate was smiling properly. Not the careful, controlled expression she'd worn as a duchess, but something genuine and bright. Thank you, she said, for all of this, for taking a mad proposition from a desperate woman and turning it into this. She gestured around the room, but Thomas knew she meant more than just the inn. She meant the life they'd built, the friendship they'd forged, the freedom they'd claimed. You saved me too, Thomas said quietly. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have something to build toward, someone to build with. To partnership, then, Kate said, holding out her hand. Thomas shook it formally, then ruined the solemnness by pulling her into another quick hug. To partnership, to freedom, to whatever comes next. Spring arrived in Glenmara with wild abandon, covering the coastal hills in heather and filling the air with salt and promise. The Sailor's Rest had become a beloved fixture in the small town, known for its warm welcome, decent food, and the odd pair of siblings who ran it with such obvious affection. The locals had long since accepted Thomas and Kate's story without question. They were the Carvers, brother and sister from the South, who'd left their old lives behind after family tragedy and built something new by the sea. If there were occasional inconsistencies, Kate's accent that sometimes slipped back into aristocratic vowels, or Thomas's protective hovering that seemed more devoted than merely fraternal, no one remarked upon it. Kate had blossomed in the months since Pemberton's letter, as if the final severing of her old life had allowed her to fully inhabit her new one. She'd learned to bake bread that the village children would line up for, had made friends with the local women who taught her to knit and gossip, and had started a small lending library in the inn's common room that had become wildly popular.
Thomas, for his part, had expanded the stable, taking on training work for local farmers, and building a reputation for his gentle hand with difficult horses. He still visited Sarah's grave in his mind, still spoke to her sometimes in the quiet moments before sleep, but the conversations had changed. Less apology, less grief, more gratitude for what had been and acceptance of what now was. On a particularly beautiful morning in early May, a stranger arrived at the Sailor's Rest. He was well dressed but dusty from travel, with sharp eyes that took in everything. He asked for a room and introduced himself as Mr. James Whitmore, a solicitor from Edinburgh. Kate showed him to one of their better rooms, while Thomas handled his horse, a quality animal that spoke of money and status. They exchanged worried glances when they crossed paths in the hallway. "Should we run?" Kate whispered. "Let's hear him out first," Thomas murmured back. "Running might draw more attention than staying." That evening, Mr. Whitmore requested a private word with Miss Carver in the inn's small office. Thomas positioned himself just outside the door, close enough to intervene if needed, while Kate sat across from the solicitor with admirable composure. "I'll come straight to the point, Miss Carver," Whitmore said, setting a leather folder on the desk between them. "I've been searching for you for some time, or rather, searching for Catherine Ashford, Duchess of Ashford, who supposedly drowned last autumn." Kate's face went carefully blank. "I'm afraid you have me confused with someone else, Mr. Whitmore. I'm simply Kate Carver, an innkeeper." "Of course," Whitmore said smoothly. "Then I suppose this doesn't concern you." He opened the folder, withdrew a document. "But if you were Catherine Ashford, you'd want to know that your late husband's personal fortune, separate from the estate and title, has been sitting in trust for a full year now. According to his will, if his widow did not claim it within that time, it was to be distributed to various charities. However, certain irregularities in the investigation of her death have come to light." He pushed the document toward Kate. "The body recovered from the river was not the Duchess. This has been confirmed by independent investigators hired by your husband's cousin, who wanted to ensure no foul play was involved in the estate's transfer. Officially, the law still considers Catherine Ashford dead, but unofficially, there are those who suspect otherwise and are curious where she might be." Kate didn't touch the document. "What do you want, Mr. Whitmore?" "To do my job, Miss Carver. Or Your Grace, if you prefer." He pulled out another paper. "The personal fortune your husband left you amounts to £20,000. Quite separate from property or title, this was his private wealth, accumulated before your marriage. In his will, he left it to you specifically, with no conditions. I am the executor of that will, and I am duty-bound to ensure you receive it, if you are indeed Catherine Ashford." Thomas, listening from the hallway, felt his breath catch. £20,000! It was a fortune beyond imagining, enough to buy a dozen inns, to live in comfort for the rest of their lives, to disappear anywhere in the world they chose. It was also a trap. Kate seemed to realize this as well. And if someone were to claim this fortune as Catherine Ashford," she said carefully, "what would happen to their legal status? Would they suddenly be alive again in the eyes of the law?" "Ah," Whitmore smiled, and it was not unkind. "There's the clever question. The answer is complicated. She, would need to prove identity to claim the money. That proof would naturally make it rather difficult to remain legally dead. It would likely trigger investigations, questions, possibly even legal proceedings about the false death report."
"So claiming the money means claiming the life," Kate said. "And claiming the life means going back to everything she escaped." "Not necessarily." Whitmore leaned back in his chair. "I'm a practical man, Miss Carver, and I was made aware of certain facts about your marriage by your husband's doctor, who felt compelled to break confidence after the Duke's death. Facts about your husband's nature, his treatment of you, the reason you might wish to escape." He met Kate's eyes steadily. "I'm also a man with daughters. I would not want them trapped as you were trapped. So I propose an alternative. You sign an affidavit confirming your identity. I transfer the funds to an account of your choosing under whatever name you prefer, and then I file paperwork confirming that Catherine Ashford was found alive but died shortly thereafter of fever. I have a sympathetic doctor in Edinburgh who will backdate the necessary death certificate. You get the money. Catherine Ashford gets properly and legally buried. Everyone's satisfied." Kate stared at him. "Why would you do this? Risk your reputation, your career?" "Because the law, Miss Carver, is meant to serve justice. And there is no justice in forcing a woman back into a cage she barely escaped." He slid a paper toward her. "This is the affidavit. Sign it as Catherine Ashford, and you'll be able to access the funds within a fortnight. Then Catherine Ashford will die peacefully in her sleep, properly documented and beyond question. And Kate Carver will live the rest of her life in peace." Thomas pushed open the door, unable to stay silent any longer. "And what do you get from this arrangement, Mr. Whitmore? Forgive me for being suspicious, but this seems remarkably generous for a stranger." Whitmore turned to him without surprise, as if he'd known Thomas was there all along. "I get to do the right thing, Mr. Carver. And I get to sleep at night knowing I helped two people who clearly care for each other build a life free from the cruelties of the past." He stood, leaving the papers on the desk. "I'll stay the night and depart tomorrow morning. If Miss Carver wishes to sign the affidavit, she can bring it to me at breakfast. If not, I'll leave and we'll pretend this conversation never happened. The choice is entirely yours." After he left, Thomas and Kate sat in heavy silence, staring at the documents as if they were serpents. "It could be a trap," Thomas said finally. "It could be real," Kate countered. £20,000. Freedom. They looked at each other, and Thomas saw his own uncertainty reflected in Kate's eyes. The money would change everything. But they'd built this life with so little. Did they need more? Or would that money bring complications, suspicions, dangers they'd worked so hard to escape? "What do you want?" Thomas asked. "Forget what's practical or safe. What do you want?" Kate was quiet for a long time. "I want," she said slowly, "to stop running, to stop looking over my shoulder, to be truly, completely free." She picked up the affidavit. "This money was mine by right, bought with 7 years of suffering. And if this man is genuine, if he truly can lay Catherine Ashford to rest properly while giving Kate Carver the means to live well, then yes, I want that." "Then we take the risk," Thomas said, reaching for her hand. "Together." The next morning, Kate signed the affidavit with a steady hand while Mr. Whitmore witnessed it over breakfast. Thomas stood beside her, protective and present, as she wrote Catherine Ashford, Duchess of Ashford, for what she swore would be the final time. Whitmore sealed the document with wax and packed it carefully in his case. "The funds will be available in Edinburgh within 2 weeks, under the name Kate Carver. I've arranged for a private banker who specializes in discretion." He handed Kate a card. "Contact this gentleman when you're ready to claim the money. And Miss Carver?" He paused at the door. "Live well, both of you. It's the best revenge against those who tried to make you small." After he left, Kate collapsed into a chair, shaking with relief or terror, or perhaps both. Thomas knelt beside her, taking her cold hands in his warm ones. "We did it," he said quietly. "Again. We keep doing the impossible." "Because we're either very brave or very stupid," Kate said, laughing weakly. "Can't it be both?" She pulled him into a hug, and they stayed like that for a long moment, anchoring each other against the weight of what they'd just done and the possibilities stretching ahead. 2 weeks later, Kate traveled to Edinburgh with Thomas as her escort. They met with Whitmore's banker, a discreet gentleman who asked no questions and transferred the entire £20,000 into an account under Kate Carver's name. She kept $2,000 accessible for immediate needs and invested the rest in safe holdings that would provide steady income. On the journey home, they stopped at a jeweler in a small town. Kate purchased 2 rings, simple silver bands, nothing ostentatious. When Thomas looked at her questioningly, she smiled. "For us," she said, "not as a marriage, before you panic, but as a promise. We're partners in this life we've built. I want a symbol of that, something visible that says we've chosen each other as family." Thomas took the ring she offered, turned it in the light. It felt right somehow. A visible commitment to the reality of their relationship. Not romantic, but no less binding for that. They were family now, by choice rather than blood. Siblings in all the ways that mattered. "All right," he said, slipping the ring onto his finger. "To family then, the one we've made." Kate put on her own ring, and they continued home to Glenmara, to the Sailor's Rest, to the life they'd built from desperation, courage, and unexpected friendship. 5 years passed like pages turning in a beloved book, full of small moments that accumulated into a rich narrative. The Sailor's Rest prospered under their care, becoming known throughout the region as the finest inn along the coast. Kate's lending library expanded into a formal collection, and she began teaching reading to children in the village, discovering a passion for education she'd never known she possessed. Thomas's stables grew as well, his reputation as a horse trainer spreading far enough that people would travel days to have him work with their animals. They settled into a comfortable rhythm, their partnership deepening into the kind of friendship that needs few words. They bickered over household management like any siblings, laughed over private jokes, and supported each other through difficult moments. When Kate had nightmares about her past, when Thomas grew melancholy on the anniversary of Sarah's death. The village embraced them completely, never questioning the fiction of their siblinghood, though there were occasional whispers about what a shame it was that such a devoted pair wasn't actually married. Kate and Thomas ignored these whispers with practiced ease. They knew what they were to each other, and that was enough. In the 6th year, a young woman arrived at the inn, barely 20, with a black eye poorly concealed by powder, and a desperate look that Kate recognized instantly. The girl asked for work, any work, claiming she'd fled an arranged marriage to a man who'd already shown his violent nature. Kate and Thomas exchanged a long look across the common room, an entire conversation happening in that glance. "What's your name?" Kate asked, gently. "Margaret, miss, but my friends call me Meg." "Well, Meg, we happen to need help in the kitchen. Room and board included, plus wages, if you're willing to work hard." Meg's eyes filled with tears. "I'll work harder than anyone, I promise." Over the following months, Meg became part of their household, and her story emerged in pieces. She'd been sold into betrothal by a gambling father, much as Kate once had been. The fiancé was cruel and possessive, the future bleak. So she'd run, with nothing but courage and hope that somewhere in the world someone might help her. Kate taught her to read and write properly, skills Meg had only barely possessed. Thomas showed her how to care for horses, discovering she had a natural gift with them. Slowly, Meg's fear faded, replaced by confidence and joy. "You saved her," Thomas told Kate one evening, watching Meg laugh with village children in the inn's yard. "We saved her," Kate corrected, "just like we saved each other." Thomas considered this, the truth of it settling over him like a benediction. They had saved each other, hadn't they?
Kate's desperate proposition had pulled him from the living death of grief. His agreement to help had given her the courage to claim her freedom. Together, they'd built something neither could have created alone. Not just an inn, not just a life, but a home. A sanctuary where broken things could be mended. That night, Thomas took the long walk up to the cliffs above Glenmara, where he'd sometimes go when he needed to think. The sea stretched before him, vast and unknowable, reflecting the last light of day. He thought of Sarah, as he often did in these quiet moments, but for the first time in years, the thought brought more comfort than pain. "I think you'd like her," he said to the wind, to memory, to whatever part of Sarah might still exist somewhere beyond the veil. "Kate, I mean. She's prickly and stubborn, and kind when she thinks no one's looking. She makes terrible puns. She snores." He smiled. "I think you'd be friends." The wind carried the smell of salt and heather, and Thomas chose to interpret that as approval. When he returned to the inn, Kate was closing up for the night, banking the fire in the common room, checking that all was secure. She looked up when he entered, read something in his expression. "You all right?" she asked. "Yeah," Thomas said, and meant it. "Yeah, I am." She smiled, understanding more than what was said. "Good. Now help me with these shutters. That hinge is sticking again." They worked together in comfortable silence, the domestic routine so familiar now that they moved around each other without collision, each knowing their role, their place. When the work was done, Kate stretched, tired and satisfied. "Another day done," she said. "Another disaster averted. Another patron satisfied. Another small victory for innkeepers everywhere." "To small victories," Thomas agreed, and spontaneously pulled her into a brief hug, the kind of casual affection that had become natural between them over the years. Kate returned it warmly, then pulled back with a grin. "You're getting sentimental in your old age, brother dear." "I'm 38, not ancient." "Tell that to your knees when you climb the stairs." They bickered amicably as they climbed to the second floor, where their rooms waited, calling good nights through the walls, settling into the separate spaces they'd always maintained. The boundaries they'd established that first night in the chapel ruins had held, and Thomas was grateful for that. Their relationship was perfect as it was, a deep, abiding friendship that asked for nothing more than honesty, loyalty, and the occasional assistance with stubborn hinges. In his room, Thomas sat on the edge of his bed and looked at the silver ring on his finger, tarnished now from years of wear, but still solid, still meaningful. He thought of the journey that had brought him here, from the depths of grief to desperate proposal to flight through darkness to this quiet life by the sea. It wasn't the life he'd imagined when he married Sarah. But it was a good life nonetheless, perhaps even a great one, in its own quiet way. He'd learned that there were many kinds of love, many forms of family, many paths to healing. And sometimes salvation came wearing the wrong clothes, asking the impossible, looking nothing like what you expected. Thomas lay down to sleep with a smile on his face, the sound of the sea outside his window, and the knowledge that in the room next door, Kate was likely already asleep, secure in the life they'd built together. Tomorrow would bring more work, more small victories, more moments of grace disguised as ordinary life. And that, Thomas thought as sleep claimed him, was more than enough. It was everything. 7 years after Kate appeared in Thomas's stable wearing his shirt, a letter arrived that would test their hard-won peace one final time. It was spring again. Glenmara was particularly beautiful in spring, the season Kate claimed as her favorite. She was in the garden with Meg, who'd become like a daughter to them both, planting herbs for the kitchen. Thomas was in the stable with a difficult colt when the postwriter handed him the letter. The seal made his stomach drop. The Ashford family crest, slightly modified. He found Kate in the garden, her hands dirty with earth, laughing at something Meg had said. She looked up at his approach, and her smile faded when she saw the letter in his hand. "Meg, dear, would you give us a moment?" Kate asked, her voice carefully controlled. After Meg laughed, Kate took the letter with shaking hands.
She broke the seal slowly, as if it might burn her, and read aloud, "Dear Aunt Catherine, I hope this letter reaches you, and that you forgive the presumption of the address. My name is James Ashford, and I am the son of the cousin who inherited the Ashford estates after your presumed death. I am writing to you not to make demands or expose your whereabouts, but to share news that I believe you deserve to hear. My father passed away last month. In his final days, he confessed to me that he had always suspected you lived, and that Lord Pemberton had confirmed as much before his own death 2 years ago. My father made me promise to tell you, should I ever find you, that he bore you no ill will and hoped you had found peace. But there is more. In organizing his papers, I discovered documents that I believe you should have, letters primarily that your late husband wrote but never sent. I have taken the liberty of enclosing one that I think explains much. You need not respond to this letter if you prefer to remain as you are. I will not disturb you further, but I thought you deserved to know the truth, whatever peace or pain it might bring. Your nephew, if I may presume, James Ashford." With trembling hands, Kate unfolded a second, older letter. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded. It was dated 2 weeks before her husband's death. "Catherine, by the time you read this, if you ever do, I will likely be dead. The doctors have given me a month at most, though I suspect I have less. I am writing to apologize, though I know it is far too late for such gestures to matter. I was a poor husband to you. No, let me be honest, for once in my miserable life, I was a cruel husband. Not in dramatic ways that would make for good gossip, but in the daily erosion of spirit that comes from treating another human being as an object to be possessed rather than a person to be cherished. You deserved love, Catherine. You deserved kindness, children, laughter, all the things I was too cold and selfish to provide. I made you believe you were worthless when you could not conceive, when the truth is that the fault was likely mine. My first wife and I tried for 12 years without success before she died. I never told you that. It seemed easier to let you carry the blame. I took lovers to wound you, to assert my power, to prove I could still feel something when I felt so dead inside. And in doing so, I killed whatever spark of life you brought to our marriage. I am leaving you money, my personal fortune, separate from the estate which must go to my cousin by law. It is not enough, could never be enough, but it is all I have to give. Use it to be free, Catherine. Use it to be happy, if such a thing is possible after what I've done to you. If there is any mercy in the universe, I will be judged harshly for my sins. I deserve no less. I hope you dance on my grave. I hope you find love, real love, and know what I was too broken to give you. Forgive me if you can. I do not deserve it, but I ask nonetheless. Edmund. Kate read the letter twice, then a third time, her face unreadable. Thomas stood beside her, his hand on her shoulder, waiting. He knew, she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. All along, he knew it was his failing, not mine. And he let me believe. Her voice broke. Thomas pulled her into his arms as she began to cry, great shaking sobs that seemed torn from somewhere deep inside. She'd cried before, in the early days of their escape, but this was different. This was grief not for what was lost, but for what had never been, for the years stolen by a man who'd known the truth and chosen cruelty anyway. I wasted so much time hating myself, Kate gasped between sobs, believing I was broken, worthless, barren, and all along— You were none of those things, Thomas said fiercely, none of them.
You hear me, Kate? You were perfect as you were. He was the broken one. They stood in the garden for a long time, Kate crying years' worth of tears against Thomas' shoulder, while Meg watched from the kitchen window with worried eyes, and the spring sun slowly crossed the sky. Eventually, the tears subsided. Kate pulled back, wiping her face with dirty hands, leaving streaks of earth and salt water across her cheeks. "What do I do with this?" she asked, holding up the letter. How do I let go of the anger now that I know he was sorry?" Thomas thought carefully before answering. "I think," he said slowly, "you accept that both things can be true. He was cruel, and he was sorry. He hurt you deeply, and he recognized it too late. You have every right to your anger, and you have every right to let some of it go now that you know the truth." He touched her face gently. "But Kate, the most important truth is this. You survived him. You escaped. You built a life so beautiful that his nephew crossed a country to tell you that you were right to run. That's the truth that matters most." Kate held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. She walked to the garden's fire pit. They'd built one for burning refuse, and held her late husband's letter over the flames. "I forgive you, Edmund," she said quietly. "Not because you deserve it, but because I deserve to be free of you. Completely. Finally." She dropped the letter, watched it catch and curl and turn to ash. "And now, you're gone. Truly." She turned back to Thomas, and, despite the tear stains and dirt, she was smiling. "Thank you. For everything. For 7 years of teaching me what it means to be treated with respect and kindness. For showing me what real partnership looks like." "Kate," Thomas started, but she held up her hand. "Let me finish. You gave me friendship when I was so desperate I didn't even know how to ask for it properly. You kept your promises, never demanded more than I could give, and built a life with me that feels more like home than anywhere I've ever lived." She took his hands in hers. "You're the best person I know, Thomas Carver, and I'm grateful every single day that I was mad enough to walk into your stable wearing your shirt and ask for the impossible." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "You saved me too," he said. "I was barely living before you appeared. Just existing, day after day. You gave me a reason to want more than that." They stood together in the garden, the remains of Edmund Ashford's apology turning to ash behind them, and Thomas felt a chapter closing, not just for Kate, but for both of them. The past, with all its pain and loss and complicated truths, was finally laid to rest. "What do we do now?" Kate asked. Thomas looked around the garden they'd planted, at the inn beyond, where Meg was watching protectively, at the life they'd built from nothing but courage and desperate trust. "We keep living," he said simply. "We keep building. We keep choosing each other, every day." "That sounds perfect," Kate said, and squeezed his hands before releasing them. "Now help me finish planting these herbs. The dinner guests will be here in 3 hours, and I need to wash off this extremely attractive combination of dirt and tears." They worked together in the garden, easy and comfortable, while the spring sun warmed their backs and the sea wind carried the smell of salt and possibility. The silver rings on their fingers caught the light occasionally, tarnished now, well-worn, more precious for their imperfection. That evening, as they served dinner to a full common room, Kate caught Thomas's eye across the crowd and smiled. It was her real smile, the one that had taken years to fully emerge, open, genuine, free of the careful control she'd learned as a Duchess. Thomas smiled back, and in that moment he understood something profound. There were many kinds of love stories in the world. The romantic kind, yes, but also this, the story of 2 people who saved each other by offering friendship when the world expected passion, partnership when society demanded possession, and loyalty without the chains of conventional obligation. It wasn't the story he'd imagined when he was young and in love with Sarah, planning a future full of children and quiet domestic bliss, but it was a story worth living nonetheless, perhaps, in its own way, worth telling. As the evening wound down and the last guests retired to their rooms, Kate and Thomas sat together by the common room fire, as they did most nights. Kate was mending a tablecloth, her needle moving with practiced ease. Thomas was reading, a novel Kate had recommended, something about adventure on the high seas that she'd insisted was better than it had any right to be. "Thomas?" Kate said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. Do you ever regret it, saying yes that morning when you could have sent me away?" He looked up from his book, considered the question seriously. "No," he said finally, "never. Do you regret asking?" "Not even for a moment." She set down her mending, looked at him directly. "I want you to know, in case I don't say it often enough, that you gave me my life back. More than that, you helped me discover a life I didn't even know I wanted. A real life with real connections and purpose and joy. Kate, and I know," she continued, "that we're not romantic, that you still carry Sarah with you, and that's as it should be. But I want you to know that what we have, this partnership, this friendship, it's the most valuable thing in my world. You're my family, Thomas, my real family, the one I chose and who chose me back." Thomas set down his book, feeling emotion swell in his chest. "You're my family too," he said, his voice rough. "The life we've built, Kate, it's been the greatest gift. I mean that." She smiled, picked up her mending again. "Good. I'm glad we've established that. Now read to me from your book. I want to know if the pirate captain survives the storm." So Thomas read aloud while Kate sewed, and the fire crackled, and outside the window the sea moved in its eternal rhythm. It was an ordinary evening in an ordinary inn in an ordinary Scottish coastal town. It was everything. And when they finally climbed the stairs to their separate rooms, calling good nights through the walls, Thomas lay in his bed and thought about the strange path that had brought him here. From Sarah's death to Kate's desperate proposal to this quiet life of purpose and partnership. It hadn't been the journey he'd expected, but it had led him somewhere good, somewhere real, somewhere that felt finally and completely like home. In the room next door, Kate lay in her own bed, the silver ring on her finger catching the moonlight from the window. She thought of the girl she'd been, desperate, trapped, willing to risk everything for even the possibility of freedom. And she thought of the woman she'd become, stronger, happier, surrounded by people who valued her for who she was rather than what she represented. "Thank you," she thought, sending the gratitude out into the universe. To Thomas, to that long-ago morning when she'd made the maddest choice of her life. To whatever force had guided her through the woods to his stable door. Thank you for this life, for every ordinary, extraordinary moment of it. And as she drifted off to sleep, Kate smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring more of the same. More work, more laughter, more small moments of grace. More life, lived on her own terms, with a partner who'd proven that family was about choice rather than obligation, and that love came in many forms, all of them valid, all of them real. The Duchess who died in the river had been laid to rest at last, properly and permanently. In her place stood Kate Carver, innkeeper, teacher, friend, and she was finally and completely free.